HOA board just called my flood wall a joke, costing me $8,000. With massive storms hitting Texas every spring, I knew I had to act fast. I poured weeks and my life savings into a professional flood barrier. Engineered stone, perfect drainage, fully permitted. Why go to such extremes? My wife Martha has dementia. The last flood left her crying and terrified for days, completely lost. I swore she'd never endure that again. At the community barbecue, the board showed up laughing at my wall. "What's next, Donovan? Sandbags?" Winston sneered. "This peasant stonework is a joke." The others nodded like I was the neighborhood idiot. "This joke has to go," he declared. "Remove it or we foreclose." Minutes later, the storm hit hard. These three powerful people were about to learn why you never mess with a man who truly understands how water works. I'm Garrett Donovan, retired plumber, and this is how three bullies got exactly what they deserved. Ever dealt with neighbors who thought they could push you around? Where are you watching from tonight? Let me take you back to Willowbrook Estates, just outside Houston. Picture a neighborhood where every lawn looks like it belongs on a golf course, where the mailboxes cost more than most people's cars, and where the HOA treats working folks like me about as welcome as ants at a picnic. I moved there in 2019 with my wife, Martha. She'd just been diagnosed with early-stage dementia, and we needed somewhere quiet, safe. The smell of fresh-cut grass and the sound of kids playing seemed perfect. What I didn't count on was the Ashford family treating the place like their personal kingdom. Winston Ashford III, and yes, he always used the third, was HOA president. Trust fund baby who inherited daddy's development company. Picture a guy who wears polo shirts to check the mail and considers anyone without a college degree a property value threat. His wife Brielle designed interiors for McMansions and talked about aesthetic harmony like it was a religion. Then there's Dr. Kenneth Silverton, the board treasurer, cardiologist with the biggest lot in the neighborhood right on the creek, the kind of guy who'd correct your grammar while you're having a heart attack. All three lived in those premium creekside lots, the ones that flooded every spring when the rains came hard. See, Texas weather doesn't mess around. When those Gulf storms roll in, they dump rain like God's emptying a bucket. Our neighborhood sits in what engineers call a natural basin, basically a big bowl where water loves to collect. The original developers knew this. That's why they built proper drainage channels directing water toward the creek. But here's where it gets interesting. After I moved in, I noticed something weird during my morning walks. The storm drains that should have carried water toward the creek had been redirected. Heavy concrete barriers, professional-grade diverters, all pointing water away from the creekside lots and toward the middle-income section where I lived. I pulled out my old Army Corps surveying tools. Yeah, I did more than just fix pipes in my day. And confirmed what I suspected. Someone had illegally modified the neighborhood's entire drainage system. Martha and I learned this the hard way during Hurricane Laura in 2020. Water came pouring through our backyard like a river. Our basement flooded. Lost family photos, Martha's piano, thousands in damage. Meanwhile, the Ashfords' properties stayed bone dry. That's when I decided to build protection. I'm talking about a proper flood barrier, 3 feet high, engineered stone with built-in drainage channels that would redirect water back where it belonged. Cost me $8,000 and 3 weeks of back-breaking work. But when I was done, that wall was a thing of beauty. Even added flower boxes on top and LED lighting that made it look like something from Better Homes and Gardens. The HOA noticed immediately. First came the passive-aggressive note in my mailbox. Resident concern regarding unapproved structure. Then the formal violation letter. Finally, Winston himself showed up at my door with his little clipboard and that smirk that made you want to introduce his face to a wrench. "Mr. Donovan," he said, not bothering to hide his disdain, "this fortress you've built violates our community standards. It's got to go." "It's flood protection," I replied, "and it's entirely on my property." Brielle appeared beside him like she'd been summoned. "It's completely out of character with our neighborhood aesthetic. It looks like, well, like trailer park trash." The smell of her expensive perfume couldn't mask the stench of her attitude. "We're giving you 30 days, Winston continued. "Remove it voluntarily or we'll be forced to take legal action." That's when Dr. Silverton chimed in from the street. "What's next, Donovan? Sandbags and plastic sheeting?" They all laughed. Actually laughed. Standing there, listening to these people mock the protection that would keep my home and my sick wife safe from flooding, I felt something click inside my chest. Not anger exactly, more like the cold, calculated fury of a man who spent 40 years solving problems that seemed impossible. They wanted a fight? They had no idea who they were dealing with. The next morning, I found Martha in the kitchen, staring at the coffee maker like she'd never seen one before. Early dementia steals moments like that, little pieces of the person you love disappearing without warning. I helped her with breakfast, kissed her forehead, and headed out to my workshop. Time to get creative. If they wanted aesthetics, I'd give them aesthetics. But I'd also give them a lesson in what happens when you mess with a man who understands water, pressure, and the physics of fluid dynamics. I spent the next week rebuilding that wall into something even more beautiful. Natural fieldstone instead of plain concrete blocks. Integrated planters with actual drainage systems hidden inside. Curved sections that followed the natural slope of my yard. When the morning sun hit those stones just right, they practically glowed. The best part? Every single modification made the flood protection even better. 2 weeks later, the board called an emergency meeting. I could smell the fresh brewed coffee and hear the rustle of official documents as neighbors filed into the community center. Winston stood at the front like he was addressing Congress. "We're here to discuss the ongoing situation with Mr. Donovan's construction project," he announced, gesturing toward me like I was a problem to be solved. Brielle pulled out her phone, showing pictures of my wall to the crowd. "This is completely inappropriate for our community character. Look at this medieval fortress aesthetic." I stood up. "Actually, it's called fieldstone masonry, same technique used in million-dollar Tuscan villas." The room went quiet. "Furthermore," I continued, "every component meets or exceeds county building codes. I have permits for the electrical work, engineering surveys for the foundation, and approval from the city planning department for all modifications." Winston's eye twitched. "Permits can be challenged. We have the right to maintain community standards." That's when I dropped my first surprise. "Funny thing about community standards," I said, reaching into my folder. "I did some research into previous HOA approvals. Turns out your pool deck, Winston, extends 14 feet into the required setback zone. Never saw a permit for that." I watched the color drain from his face. "And Brielle, that decorative gazebo, county records show it's supposed to be temporary. You've had it up for 3 years without proper foundation permits." Dr. Silverton shifted in his seat. "That's completely different. Those are minor aesthetic. Kenneth, your boat dock is built on wetland classified as protected habitat. EPA violations carry federal penalties." The room had gone dead silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Winston tried to regain control. "Mr. Donovan, you're deflecting from the issue at hand. Your wall violates our covenants regarding—" "Which covenants exactly?" I pulled out a thick binder. "I've read every page of our CC&Rs. There's nothing prohibiting flood protection structures. In fact, Section 7.3 specifically encourages reasonable measures to protect property value and resident safety." Brielle's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the table. "The board has discretionary authority to interpret—" "The board has authority to enforce existing rules," I interrupted, "not to create new ones retroactively, especially not when those new rules seem to apply selectively." I let that hang in the air for a moment. "See, I've been documenting every HOA approval for the past 5 years. Interesting pattern emerges. Families in the creekside lots get approved for everything: pool houses, guest cottages, decorative walls, you name it. Families in the middle section? Denied for minor modifications like replacing mailbox posts." The mini twist hit like a thunderclap. Winston realized I hadn't just built a wall. I'd built a case. "This meeting is adjourned," he announced hastily, but I wasn't done. "Before everyone leaves," I called out, "I want to share something I learned about drainage management during my 20 years with the Army Corps of Engineers." The room settled back down. "When water flow gets artificially redirected, it has to go somewhere. Basic physics. You can't just make water disappear." I gestured toward my folder of surveys and photos. "Someone in this neighborhood has been modifying storm drainage to protect certain properties at the expense of others. That's not just a violation of city engineering codes. It's theft of a public utility." Dr. Silverton's stethoscope rattled as he stood up too quickly. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious crime," I replied. Carries fines up to $50,000 per violation, plus restoration costs. The city takes drainage modification very seriously, especially after Harvey. Winston's hands were actually shaking as he gathered his papers. We'll table this discussion pending further review. As people filed out, I caught bits of whispered conversations. Neighbors were starting to ask questions, starting to wonder why their basements flooded while others stayed dry. The seed was planted. Now I just had to water it. 3 days later, I was in my workshop organizing tools when I heard the rumble of official vehicles outside. Through my window, I watched a city inspector climb out of a white pickup truck, clipboard in hand. Behind him, Winston and Dr. Silverton flanked him like they were his personal bodyguards. The inspector was a thin man named Rodriguez who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The sound of his steel-toed boots on my walkway reminded me of military inspections. Precise, measured, inevitable. Mr. Donovan, City Building Department, we received a complaint about unpermitted electrical work. I wiped my hands on a shop rag that smelled of motor oil and honest work. Happy to show you around, everything's up to code. Winston stood behind Rodriguez with his arms crossed, wearing the kind of smug expression that begged for a reality check. We'll see about that. For the next hour, Rodriguez examined every wire, every connection, every junction box in my flood walls lighting system. I watched him test voltage with his multimeter, checking each circuit against code requirements. This is professional grade work, he finally announced. Better than most contractors I inspect. I pulled out my folder, the one that was getting thicker every day. I'm a licensed master electrician, been maintaining that certification for 35 years. Here's my permit application, approval stamp, and final inspection from when I installed the system. Rodriguez examined the paperwork while Winston's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. Everything checks out, the inspector said. This installation exceeds current code requirements. That's when I played my next card. Rodriguez, while you're here, mind taking a look at something? I led the group toward the drainage area behind my property. I've been documenting some interesting modifications to our stormwater system. I pointed out the concrete barriers redirecting water flow, the professional-grade diverters, the way natural drainage patterns had been altered. Rodriguez pulled out his own measuring tools, frowning as he traced the water channels. This is all unpermitted work, he said slowly. Major modifications to municipal drainage require engineering approval and environmental impact studies. Dr. Silverton cleared his throat nervously. Those improvements were made by the developer, years ago. Sir, I can date concrete work pretty accurately. This stuff is maybe 2 years old. Rodriguez made notes on his clipboard. And whoever did it knew what they were doing. This is expensive, professional-grade work. I watched Winston and Kenneth exchange glances. In that moment, I could practically see them calculating costs, financial and legal. The city takes drainage modification very seriously, Rodriguez continued. After Hurricane Harvey, we've got zero tolerance for unauthorized changes to flood management infrastructure. Here's what I'd learned from my old Army Corps days. Water management is like a chess game. Every move creates consequences 3 steps down the board. These guys had moved water away from their properties without considering where it would go. Basic physics says it had to go somewhere. Rodriguez, I said, what's the penalty for unauthorized drainage modification? Depends on scope. Minor stuff might be 5,000–10,000 in fines. Major modifications. He looked at the extensive concrete work around us. This could hit 50 grand plus full restoration costs. And if there's environmental damage to protected wetlands, EPA gets involved. The color drained from Kenneth's face like someone had pulled a plug. After Rodriguez left with promises to look into the drainage situation more thoroughly, Winston tried one last desperate move. Donovan, this is getting out of hand. Maybe we can reach some kind of accommodation. What kind of accommodation? You keep your wall, we drop the HOA complaint, everyone goes back to their normal lives. I leaned against my workbench, considering. The smell of sawdust and WD-40 filled the space between us. Here's my counteroffer, I said. You restore the original drainage patterns, you pay for the damage caused to affected properties over the past 2 years, and you resign from the board. Winston's laugh was sharp and bitter. That's ridiculous. We're not admitting to anything. Then I guess we'll let the city investigation run its course. Dr. Silverton stepped forward. You're making a serious mistake, Donovan. We have resources. We have connections. We can make your life very difficult. That's when I smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that comes right before someone learns a lesson they'll never forget. Kenneth, you know what I learned during 40 years of fixing other people's problems? The bigger they think they are, the harder they fall. And you three, you're about to fall very hard. As they left, I could hear Winston's angry whisper. We need to accelerate this, get the lawyers involved, file for an injunction. Perfect. Let them escalate. Every move they made just dug their hole deeper. I had work to do. The legal papers arrived on a Tuesday morning that smelled like rain and bad decisions. Martha and I were having breakfast when the process server knocked, his clipboard thick with documents that rustled like autumn leaves. Temporary restraining order, he announced, handing me an envelope thick enough to choke a horse. You're ordered to cease all construction activities and remove existing structures pending court review. After he left, I spread the papers across my kitchen table. 43 pages of legal nonsense, but the gist was simple. The HOA was claiming my flood wall created dangerous water redirection that threatened neighboring properties. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Martha looked confused, that lost expression that broke my heart every time. Garrett, are those people trying to hurt us? No, sweetheart, they're just scared. Scared people do stupid things. I called my old Army buddy Jake, who'd become a civil engineer after his service. 20 minutes later, he was standing in my backyard with surveying equipment, shaking his head at what he saw. Jesus, Garrett, someone really screwed with the drainage flow here. Jake traced the concrete barriers with his laser level. This is systematic redirection on a major scale. How major? I'm talking about diverting maybe 40% of the neighborhood's stormwater away from the natural flow path. During a heavy rain, that's tens of thousands of gallons per hour. Jake's equipment beeped as he took measurements. The sound reminded me of medical monitors. Steady, urgent, diagnostic. Here's what's beautiful about your wall, he continued. It's not redirecting water at all. It's just protecting your property while allowing natural flow to resume. Can you put that in a report? Already working on it. That afternoon, Winston showed up with a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Some downtown shark in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The lawyer introduced himself as Sterling Morrison, spoke in measured tones that dripped condescension. Mr. Donovan, my clients are prepared to be reasonable. Remove the wall voluntarily, and we'll withdraw the legal action. I gestured toward my patio chairs. Coffee? This isn't a social visit. Suit yourself. I poured myself a cup, letting the silence stretch. You know, Sterling, I've been thinking about this whole situation. Your clients claim my wall redirects water dangerously. That's correct. Funny thing is, I had an independent engineer survey the property today. Turns out my wall doesn't redirect anything. But you know what does redirect water? Those concrete barriers behind the creekside properties. Sterling's pen stopped moving across his legal pad. Furthermore, I continued, I've documented systematic drainage modification that violates city codes, county flood management regulations, and potentially federal environmental protection statutes. Winston shifted uncomfortably. That's completely irrelevant to... Oh, it's very relevant. See, when you file a frivolous lawsuit claiming someone else is creating dangerous water conditions while you're actively guilty of the same thing on a much larger scale, that opens you up to some interesting legal concepts. I pulled out Jake's preliminary report, sliding it across the table. The official letterhead made it clear this wasn't amateur hour anymore. Malicious prosecution, abusive process, intentional infliction of emotional distress on an elderly couple dealing with medical challenges. I watched Sterling's eyes widen as he scanned the engineering data. My wife has dementia, Sterling. This harassment is affecting her health. Sterling whispered something to Winston, who went pale. There's more, I said. Jake's report identifies approximately $200,000 in drainage modifications that appear to violate multiple environmental regulations. The EPA takes wetland interference very seriously. Dr. Silverton's voice cracked when he spoke. We didn't interfere with any wetlands. Kenneth, that creek behind your property, it's classified as protected aquatic habitat. Modifying its watershed without federal permits carries penalties up to $25,000 per day of violation. The mini twist hit like a sledgehammer. They'd come here threatening me with legal action, only to discover they were sitting on a powder keg of environmental violations. Translation: you guys are in deep trouble and trying to blame me just makes it worse. Sterling gathered his papers hastily. We need to review this information. Take your time. But while you're reviewing, you might want to know that Jake's filed his preliminary findings with the city engineering department. They're scheduling a comprehensive watershed analysis for next week. After they left, I sat on my patio listening to the evening sounds of suburbia. Lawnmowers, kids playing, the distant hum of air conditioners working overtime. The approaching storm clouds carried the metallic smell of rain, and I found myself almost looking forward to the next downpour. Let it rain. My wall was ready. The question was, were theirs? The breakthrough came from the most unlikely source, Mrs. Brianna, the 70-year-old retired librarian who lived 3 houses down. She knocked on my door Friday evening, clutching a manila folder like it contained state secrets. Mr. Donovan, I hope you don't mind my intrusion, but I've been following this situation with considerable interest. The smell of her jasmine tea drifted from her thermos as she settled into my living room chair. Martha was having a good day, chatting about her garden, so I felt comfortable focusing on whatever Mrs. Brianna had discovered. I spent 30 years as a research librarian, she continued, and this whole drainage mystery bothered me, so I did what librarians do. I dug into the records. She opened her folder, revealing photocopied documents, aerial photographs, and what looked like engineering blueprints. These are the original subdivision plans from 1987. Notice anything interesting about the drainage design? I studied the blueprints. The original drainage system was elegantly simple, natural flow patterns that channeled stormwater toward the creek through a series of retention ponds and overflow channels. Now look at this. She produced a more recent aerial photograph. This is from 2019, right after the Ashfords moved in. The difference was striking. Where the original plans showed natural water flow, someone had installed an elaborate system of underground diverters, concrete channels, and what appeared to be a sophisticated pump system. Mrs. Brianna, this must have cost $200,000 minimum, she said crisply. I checked with 3 drainage contractors. This wasn't some weekend DIY project. She pulled out another document that made my blood run cold. A work order from Ashford Development Company dated September 2019 for emergency flood mitigation, hurricane preparation. They did this work right after Hurricane Dorian when everyone was focused on storm prep. No permits, no environmental studies, no neighborhood notification. Just moved in their own equipment and completely altered 30 years of established drainage patterns. The pieces clicked into place like a machine finding its rhythm. The Ashfords hadn't just bought houses in Willowbrook Estates, they'd bought the whole development. Winston's company owned the empty lots, controlled the HOA management contract, and had systematically modified infrastructure to protect their investment properties. But here's the smoking gun, Mrs. Brianna said, producing a thick legal document. The original environmental impact study from 1987. It specifically identifies the creek behind their properties as protected aquatic habitat. Any modification to its watershed requires federal approval. I felt that cold fury building again, the kind that comes when you realize how thoroughly you've been played. They've been flooding the middle-income section to protect their premium lots, and they've been using HOA authority to prevent residents from protecting themselves. Mrs. Brianna nodded grimly. It gets worse. I traced the property ownership records. Ashford Development has been systematically buying foreclosed homes in the flood-affected areas, then flipping them to unsuspecting buyers without disclosing the drainage modifications. How many homes? 18 properties in the past 2 years, average profit margin of $60,000 per flip. The scope was breathtaking. They weren't just stealing water, they were running a sophisticated real estate scam that profited from the flooding they'd created. Mrs. Brianna, this is fraud on a massive scale. Indeed, and I believe we have grounds for both criminal complaints and civil action. She handed me a business card. My nephew practices environmental law, specializes in cases involving illegal watershed modification. As she left, I sat in my workshop surrounded by tools and blueprints, finally understanding the full scope of what I was up against. This wasn't just about an HOA board drunk on petty power. This was organized crime disguised as community development. They'd underestimated a retired plumber with time, tools, and nothing left to lose. Big mistake. Sunday morning found me in my workshop before dawn, surrounded by blueprints, legal documents, and the kind of detailed planning that comes from 40 years of solving impossible problems. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with machine oil as I laid out my strategy like a general preparing for war. Step 1. Document everything. I'd learned from the Army Corps that engineering problems require engineering solutions. Mrs. Brianna's nephew, David Liu, was driving down from Dallas that afternoon with environmental testing equipment and a camera crew from an investigative journalism outfit. But documentation was just the foundation. The real solution required something more elegant. See, here's what most people don't understand about water management. It's not about stopping water. It's about convincing water to go where you want it to go. And after studying the Ashfords' illegal modifications, I'd figured out exactly how to convince their stolen water to come home. The key was their pump system. They'd installed a sophisticated network of underground pumps to actively redirect stormwater away from their properties during heavy rains. The pumps were connected to sensors that activated automatically when water levels reached certain thresholds. Brilliant engineering, actually. Also completely illegal without permits. From my tool shed, I retrieved a collection of components that would make MacGyver proud. Industrial-grade solenoid valves, programmable timers, waterproof junction boxes, and about 100 feet of underground conduit. The kind of stuff you can buy at any electrical supply house, no questions asked. David Liu arrived that afternoon with more equipment than a NASA mission. Environmental testing kits, flow meters, underwater cameras, and a legal briefcase thick with precedent cases involving illegal drainage modification. "This is impressive work," he said, examining the Ashfords' pump system through my property survey photos. "Also flagrantly illegal. Federal environmental violations, state engineering code violations, municipal drainage violations. These people hit the trifecta. What kind of penalties are we looking at? Conservative estimate, $500,000 in fines, full restoration costs, and potential criminal charges for environmental fraud." We spent the next week building two parallel strategies, legal and hydraulic. The legal strategy was David's department. He filed complaints with the EPA, the State Environmental Agency, the County Engineering Department, and the City Planning Office. Each agency would conduct its own investigation, but the EPA complaint was the nuclear option. Federal environmental crimes carry serious jail time. The hydraulic strategy was my specialty. Here's what I learned about the Ashfords pump system. It was designed by professionals, but maintained by amateurs. The control circuits were accessible through standard utility boxes, poorly secured, and connected to the neighborhood's electrical grid through meters that could be tracked. More importantly, the system relied on a single central control unit located in a utility shed behind Kenneth's property. One central brain controlling the entire water theft operation. My modification was elegantly simple. A programmable timer that would reverse the pump flow during storm events, sending the stolen water back where it belonged. The beauty was that it would only activate during heavy rains, when the Ashfords would be too busy dealing with flooding to notice the pump reversal until it was too late. Installing the modification required some old-school breaking and entering skills I'd picked up during Army Corps emergency repairs. Nothing destructive, just accessing utility boxes, splicing control circuits, and adding my timer to the existing system. The kind of work that looked completely legitimate to casual observation. Wednesday evening, I recruited help from an unexpected source. The neighborhood kids. Tommy Martinez and Sarah Kim, both 14, both smarter than half the adults I'd met. They'd been watching the HOA drama with the kind of fascination kids reserve for adult stupidity. "Mr. D, you need us to be lookouts while you install your secret gadget?" Tommy grinned like Christmas had come early. "It's not secret, it's justice. And yes, I need lookouts." The installation took 2 hours on a moonless Thursday night. Tommy and Sarah positioned themselves with walkie-talkies while I accessed the central control unit. The pump reversal timer was a thing of beauty, completely hidden within the existing control panel, impossible to detect without detailed electrical knowledge. Friday morning, I tested the system with a garden hose, confirming that the pump reversal worked exactly as designed. Water that normally flowed away from the creekside properties would now flow directly back toward them during storm events. Translation: they'd spent $200,000 building the perfect weapon for their own destruction. The weather forecast showed severe thunderstorms arriving Sunday evening. Perfect timing for the neighborhood barbecue the HOA had scheduled at the community center, their annual spring social, where they'd undoubtedly spend more time mocking my flood wall. I spent Saturday making final preparations, waterproofing all connections, testing backup power systems, and ensuring my own property was completely protected. Sunday evening, as storm clouds gathered overhead, I felt the calm satisfaction of a job well done. Every tool was in place, every connection tested, every contingency planned. All that remained was waiting for Mother Nature to pull the trigger. The Ashfords made their move Friday afternoon while I was at Martha's doctor's appointment. I came home to find Winston's contractor, a nervous-looking guy named Pete, standing next to my flood wall with a sledgehammer and the kind of guilty expression that screams, "I know this is wrong, but I need the money." The damage was surgical. They'd targeted 3 specific sections of my wall where the drainage channels were most critical, not enough to completely destroy it, just enough to compromise its effectiveness before the weekend storms. Pete was loading his tools when I pulled into the driveway, and the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. "Afternoon, Pete," I called out calmly. "How's business?" "Mr. Donovan, Look, I'm just doing what I was hired to do." "And what exactly were you hired to do?" Pete's hands shook as he hefted the sledgehammer. "Mr. Ashford said there were safety concerns, said the wall was structurally unsound and needed emergency modification." I walked slowly around the damaged sections, examining the precision of the destruction. Someone had done their homework. These weren't random impacts. They'd targeted the exact points where water flow would be most disrupted. "Pete, you know what's interesting? I've got security cameras covering this entire property. High definition, motion activated, everything backed up to cloud storage." The sledgehammer slipped from Pete's hands, landing on my driveway with a metallic clang that echoed through the neighborhood. "I also know you've been struggling since your divorce. Behind on child support, truck payment overdue, that kind of thing." I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the camera footage. "What did Winston promise you for this job?" $5,000, Pete whispered. "Cash. Plus he said he'd pay off my outstanding HOA fines." "Your outstanding fines that you can't afford because Winston's company has been systematically targeting working-class residents with selective enforcement designed to force foreclosures." Pete's shoulders sagged like a man finally understanding how thoroughly he'd been played. That's when Winston himself appeared from behind his Lexus SUV, walking toward us with the confident stride of someone who thinks he holds all the cards. The afternoon sun reflected off his designer sunglasses as he approached. "Donovan, I was hoping to catch you. Pete here was just completing some emergency safety work on your structure. Is that what we're calling vandalism now?" Winston's smile never wavered. "Pete documented several structural deficiencies that posed immediate danger to neighboring properties. We had no choice but to authorize emergency stabilization." I held up my phone, showing him the camera footage. "You mean you had no choice but to commit criminal destruction of property while I was caring for my disabled wife? That's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime. Destruction of property, criminal trespass, conspiracy to commit fraud. Pete here has been very helpful in documenting the details." Pete stepped forward, his voice stronger now. "Mr. Donovan, he told me you'd agreed to the modifications, said it was all approved by the HOA board." Winston's eye twitched. "Pete, Actually, Pete, I think you should know that Winston's been lying to you about more than just my wall." I pulled out Mrs. Brianna's research folder. His development company has been running a foreclosure scam, targeting residents with selective enforcement to force property sales. I showed Pete the documentation. The systematic targeting, the property flips, the illegal drainage modifications that created the flooding in the first place. "You're not the first contractor he's hired for emergency work that happens to benefit his real estate investments." Pete's face went through several shades of red before settling on the kind of angry that comes when a working man realizes he's been used as a tool by someone who sees him as disposable. "Winston, you son of a—" "Pete, I strongly advise you to consider your legal exposure here," Winston interrupted desperately. That's when I played my trump card. "Pete, here's what's going to happen. You're going to help me repair this damage properly. In exchange, I'll pay you the $5,000 Winston promised, plus materials, plus a bonus for the security footage showing exactly who ordered this vandalism." Pete looked between us, calculating his options. "And Winston, you're going to reimburse me for those payments, because the alternative is criminal charges and a civil lawsuit that will make your environmental violations look like parking tickets." Winston's composure finally cracked. "This is harassment. I'm calling the police." "Please do. I'm sure they'll be very interested in the evidence of criminal conspiracy and destruction of property. Plus, the FBI tends to take environmental fraud seriously these days." As Winston stormed off, Pete and I stood in my driveway listening to the rumble of approaching storm clouds. "Mr. Donovan, Why are you helping me? Because Winston's been treating working folks like disposable tools for too long. Time someone fought back. The mini twist was perfect. Winston's own contractor had become my star witness. Saturday morning brought one of those emails that makes your blood pressure spike before you've had your first cup of coffee. The subject line read, "Urgent Neighborhood Safety Concern," and came from the official HOA board address. The message was a masterpiece of bureaucratic intimidation disguised as community concern. The board was calling an emergency meeting for Sunday evening, right before the forecasted storms, to address ongoing safety violations and neighborhood disruption caused by one resident's refusal to comply with community standards. They'd attached photos of my flood wall taken from multiple angles, complete with red arrows pointing to structural concerns and aesthetic violations. The whole thing read like a prosecution brief designed to turn my neighbors against me. But here's what they didn't expect. I'd spent the past 2 weeks building my own coalition. Mrs. Brianna had been busy with her research network. Retired librarians are basically investigators with better organizational skills. She'd documented 18 families in our neighborhood who'd suffered flood damage directly traceable to the Ashford's drainage modifications. Pete, my new ally, had provided a list of every emergency job Winston's company had commissioned over the past 2 years. The pattern was clear: systematic targeting of properties in the flood zone, followed by foreclosure opportunities that Winston's development company always seemed ready to capitalize on. Sunday evening's meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m. at the community center. By 5:30, the parking lot was fuller than I'd ever seen it. Word had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, fueled by Mrs. Brianna's documentation and growing anger at the Ashfords' manipulations. Inside, Winston stood at the front of the room behind a podium, flanked by Brielle and Dr. Silverton. He'd dressed for battle: navy blazer, American flag pin, the whole 9 yards of fake authority. The overhead lights reflected off his perfectly styled hair as he shuffled through his notes. "Friends and neighbors," he began, "we're here to address a situation that threatens the safety and property values of our entire community." Behind me, I could hear Martha whispering to Mrs. Brianna about the pretty flowers in my wall planters. Good days with dementia are precious gifts, and I was grateful she could be here for this. Winston launched into a 20-minute presentation about rogue construction projects and unilateral modifications to community drainage. He showed photos of my wall from unflattering angles, complete with PowerPoint slides about visual pollution and precedent-setting violations. "If we allow this precedent," he concluded dramatically, "every homeowner will think they can modify their property without HOA approval. Chaos, property value destruction, the end of community standards as we know them." Scattered applause from his allies, maybe 6 people in a room of 40. When my turn came, I stood slowly, letting the silence build. "Winston makes some interesting points about drainage modification," I said calmly. "So let's talk about drainage modification." I pulled out the projector I'd borrowed from the community center and connected my laptop. The first slide showed the original 1987 subdivision plans, with natural water flow patterns clearly marked. This is how our neighborhood drainage was designed to work: natural flow patterns, retention ponds, overflow channels directing water toward the creek. Click. The next slide showed the current aerial view, with the Ashford's modifications clearly visible. "This is how it works now. Notice anything different?" A murmur went through the crowd as people recognized the systematic redirection of water flow away from the creekside properties. These modifications were made in 2019 by Ashford Development Company. No permits, no environmental studies, no community notification. Winston shot to his feet. "That's completely out of order. We're here to discuss your violations, not—" "Sit down, Winston. I'm not finished." The authority in my voice surprised even me. 40 years of solving problems had taught me when to speak softly and when to project command. Click. The next slide showed Mrs. Brianna's research: 18 properties, flood damage costs, foreclosure timeline, and Ashford Development's subsequent purchases. Here's the pattern. Ashford Development redirects drainage to cause flooding in the middle income section. Properties suffer repeated flood damage. Insurance companies drop coverage. Families can't afford repairs. HOA fines pile up for maintenance violations. Foreclosures follow. Ashford Development buys properties at auction prices, then flips them for massive profits. The room erupted in angry voices as neighbors recognized their own stories in the data. Translation: they've been systematically destroying our homes to line their pockets. Dr. Silverton tried to interject, but but the crowd was past listening to board members. My final slide showed the EPA complaint, the criminal investigation, and the estimated penalties the Ashfords faced for environmental fraud. So when Winston talks about dangerous drainage modifications threatening community safety, I concluded, he's absolutely right. He just forgot to mention that he's the one who made them. Thunder rumbled outside as the first drops of rain hit the community center windows. Perfect timing. The storm hit like nature's own drum roll, building from scattered drops to steady downpour during Winston's increasingly desperate attempts to regain control of the meeting. Outside the community center's windows, lightning flickered through sheets of rain that looked like God was power-washing Texas. "This is all speculation and conspiracy theories," Winston shouted over the growing noise of rain on the metal roof. "Mr. Donovan is deflecting from his own violations by making wild accusations." That's when the lights flickered and my phone buzzed with the weather alert I'd been waiting for. Flash flood warning. Take immediate action, Mrs. Brianna leaned over to whisper, "Garrett, shouldn't we be concerned about the flooding?" "Don't worry," I said loud enough for the room to hear. "My wall is designed for exactly this kind of storm." Through the windows, we could see water beginning to pool in the community center parking lot. The storm drains were struggling to handle the volume, exactly as predicted. Winston seemed oblivious to the developing situation outside, still trying to rally support for his position. "The board has a responsibility to enforce community standards. We cannot allow—" That's when his phone rang. Then Brielle's. Then Dr. Silverton's. One by one, their faces went pale as they answered their calls. "What do you mean, water in the basement?" Winston's voice cracked as he pressed the phone to his ear. Brielle was frantically texting someone. "The sump pump's not working. How is that possible?" Dr. Silverton pushed through the crowd toward the windows. "I need to get home. Now." That's when I stood up and addressed the room with the calm confidence of someone who'd been expecting exactly this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing is a practical demonstration of proper flood engineering versus illegal water theft." Through the rain-streaked windows, we could see the Ashfords neighborhood section. Water was pooling around their houses like lakes, while the middle section, where my wall was located, remained relatively dry. You see, when you steal water from its natural flow path for 2 years, it eventually comes home with interest. Winston's face went from pale to ashen as he realized what was happening. You sabotaged our drainage system." "I restored your drainage system. There's a difference." That's when the news van pulled into the parking lot. Janet Morrison from Channel 12 had been following the story since David Liu's EPA complaint hit the public records. She'd been waiting for exactly this moment, a real-time demonstration of the flooding controversy that had been simmering in Willowbrook Estates. Within minutes, she was inside with her camera crew, interviewing residents while rain pounded the roof and water continued rising outside. "Mr. Donovan, can you explain what's happening out there?" "Simple physics," I replied, gesturing toward the windows. "The Ashford family illegally modified our neighborhood's drainage system to protect their properties at everyone else's expense. Tonight, I restored the original flow patterns. Water's going where it was always supposed to go." Winston grabbed the news camera, his desperation finally showing. "This man has sabotaged private property. He's criminally liable for—" "Mr. Ashford," Janet Morrison interrupted, "are you saying your drainage modifications were legal?" Those were emergency flood protection measures." "Did you obtain permits for those modifications?" Winston's silence was answer enough. That's when Pete arrived, soaked to the bone and grinning like he'd won the lottery. "Mr. Donovan, you gotta see this. Winston's basement is completely flooded. The whole pump system's running backwards, sending water right back where it came from." The camera crew followed Pete outside for what would become the money shot of the whole story. Winston standing knee-deep in his own flooded driveway, frantically trying to operate a manual sump pump while water poured through his front door like Niagara Falls. "Help me!" he screamed as the camera rolled. "Someone help me shut off the pumps!" I walked calmly through the rain to where Winston was struggling with $50,000 worth of flood damage in real time. "Winston, you know what's beautiful about properly engineered flood protection? It works exactly as designed. Turn off your sabotage device. My house is being destroyed." The camera captured every word as I delivered the line I'd been practicing for weeks. "I didn't sabotage anything. I just gave your stolen water back to its rightful owner. Turns out Mother Nature has been wanting to have a conversation with you for quite some time." Behind us, Brielle was crying as she watched her designer furniture floating through her living room. Dr. Silverton was on the phone with his insurance company, learning in real time that coverage doesn't extend to flooding caused by illegal drainage modifications. As emergency responders arrived to help with the flooding, Janet Morrison turned to me with the kind of smile that means someone's about to become famous for all the right reasons. "Any final thoughts, Mr. Donovan?" "Yeah. When you mess with water, water always wins." The aftermath unfolded over the next 6 weeks, like dominoes falling in slow motion, each consequence leading inevitably to the next. The EPA investigation moved faster than anyone expected, probably because Mrs. Brianna's nephew had provided such comprehensive documentation. By the end of May, Ashford Development Company faced federal environmental violations totaling $847,000 in fines, plus mandatory restoration of all illegal drainage modifications. Winston's insurance company voided his flood coverage the moment they learned about the unpermitted modifications. Turns out, artificially redirecting municipal drainage systems counts as intentional property modification that eliminates coverage. His basement restoration costs hit $180,000. Brielle's designer furniture was a total loss. Apparently, hand-carved Italian dining sets don't handle stormwater well. Dr. Silverton got hit the hardest. His home medical office in the basement was completely destroyed, along with $300,000 worth of equipment. The state medical board opened an investigation into his HOA activities after patients complained about appointment cancellations caused by flooding. Nothing kills a cardiologist's reputation like having your practice shut down by your own environmental crimes. The criminal charges came in July. Federal prosecutor Jennifer Hayes announced indictments for environmental fraud, conspiracy, and what she called systematic exploitation of municipal infrastructure for personal profit. Winston faced up to 5 years in federal prison. The development company was dissolved with assets frozen pending restitution payments. But the real victory was what happened to our neighborhood. With the Ashfords gone, residents voted to dissolve the old HOA and create a new homeowners association with actual democratic governance. Our first act was hiring a legitimate property management company that specialized in flood-prone communities. The insurance money from the drainage restoration project funded neighborhood improvements nobody had dared dream about. Professional flood barriers for every at-risk property, a community storm shelter in the renovated clubhouse, emergency supply stations stocked for hurricane season. Pete started his own contracting business specializing in flood protection systems. Turns out there's good money in helping people protect their homes instead of destroying them. He hired 3 other neighborhood residents, including Tommy Martinez's dad, who'd been unemployed since his construction company folded. Mrs. Brianna became our unofficial neighborhood historian, documenting everything for future residents. She created a digital archive showing exactly how the Ashfords scheme worked, serving as a warning for other communities facing similar exploitation. As for Martha and me, the stress reduction did wonders for her condition. Bad days became less frequent when she didn't have to worry about flooding or harassment from HOA bullies. Good days became more precious. She loves sitting by my flood wall in the evenings, watching the water flow safely past our property during storms. The wall itself has become something of a neighborhood landmark. Families bring visitors to see Donovan's Wall, the flood barrier that brought down a criminal empire. The flower boxes bloom year-round now, and the LED lighting creates a beautiful accent during evening walks. We used the settlement money from the Ashfords civil lawsuit to establish the Willowbrook Community Fund. It provides low-interest loans for flood protection improvements, emergency assistance for families facing HOA harassment, and legal support for residents dealing with property management abuse. David Liu expanded his environmental law practice to handle similar cases across Texas. He's currently working on 3 more HOA fraud cases involving illegal infrastructure modification. Turns out the Ashfords weren't the only developers who thought they could steal public resources for private profit. Last month, the city of Houston invited me to speak at their flood management conference. Standing at that podium, looking out at engineers and city planners from across the Gulf Coast, I realized something important. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to hand it back to the people who created it. The speech went viral online. Now I get emails from homeowners across the country dealing with similar HOA abuse. Martha and I are considering a consulting business, helping communities identify and address drainage manipulation schemes. But tonight, as another spring storm rolls across Texas, I'm content to sit on my patio with Martha, watching rain flow safely past our home through channels that work exactly as nature intended.